Richard Marles. Richard Marles, thank you for joining me. Let's start with this Northern Territory election result then. You've got a federal marginal in the Northern Territory in Lingiari. Solomon previously has been a marginal. Crime and safety was the number one issue here. Anthony Albanese's been dragged into that debate previously by Peter Dutton. Do you see any danger here for federal Labor out of this result?
Well, firstly, let me congratulate Leah Finocchiaro on her election. It's clearly a very significant moment for her, as your report described. And we work very closely with the Northern Territory government. I work very closely with them, actually, as the Defence Minister, with Darwin being really one of our two big garrison cities in the country. And in the same breath, let me acknowledge Eva Lawler and a Labor government which had been in power for 8 years, Michael Gunner, of course, being the Chief Minister through most of that period of time. In answer to your question, I mean, obviously we take every election seriously. We look for whatever lessons we can learn from all of them. But as I think your report, even as Leah Finocchiaro herself said, that the issues that were at hand in this election were territory-based issues, law and order being front and centre, and I think that's clearly what people are seeing as being the driving issues in respect of this result. But as I said, we look at every election very closely, and we'll do the same in respect of this one.
I guess it's shown once again there's an issue for incumbents. It's a pretty much worldwide issue at the moment, albeit the Northern Territory government's been in for 8 years. You've only been in for a couple. And of course, the cost of living plays big time into that. So does it concern you, particularly when Peter Dutton's targeting you on security, and this was a lot about personal security, that you might be heading towards a minority government result at the next poll?
Look, we're just focused on getting the job done at hand. I mean, I know that's what someone in my situation is going to say, but it is frankly what we are doing. If we get the government right and we deal with the issues right, the politics will follow. And there is no doubt that the biggest issue which is facing Australians today is cost of living. I mean, we've had a global pandemic with some major conflicts around the world, which is driving a global phenomenon of inflation. That's the fact of what's going on here. We're not immune from it. We've obviously been experiencing it over the last couple of years, and it's really been having a significant impact on Australians, and we're very mindful of that. When you look at what we've been doing in terms of our economic management, our expenditure has been entirely focused on cost of living, be it tax cuts which have been received by every tax income earner, payer, I should say. We've been had energy rebates, more affordable childcare, cheaper medicines. And if you've been the beneficiary of those measures, you'll understand that and you'll know what we've been doing. But what we've been doing as well for every Australian is waging a war on inflation. What we've done is put in place two surpluses, which is something the Liberals never did throughout the entirety of their government. And that's really the most significant step that we can take in terms of putting a downward pressure on inflation.
So you are saying here we need to get the issues right. You would say you are getting the issues right, yet you're stuck at 33. Some polls even lower, and the coalition are edging up. So you must be concerned, more and more concerned, about a hung parliament situation.
Well, people are feeling the cost of living, and we absolutely understand that. And we know that there is a lot more to do. And each and every day, we are focused on trying to win that battle on behalf of every Australian. But economic management and prudent economic management and waging a war on inflation is our number one priority. Now, that's what we are going to be focusing on from now through to the election. It's what we've been focusing on since we were elected back in May of 2022. And we will be telling that story at the next election. I mean, I feel confident about our ability to tell that story because I know where our focus is at, and it's a very different focus to what we've seen from the opposition, which frankly is wanting to talk about every other issue than the economy, every other issue than cost of living.
Well, let's get on to that.
It has nothing to say on the key issues which are affecting Australians.
Let's get onto that. I wanted to ask about this issue the opposition has been absolutely hammering you on for 2 weeks in Parliament. That's giving visitor visas to Palestinians fleeing what they call a terrorist zone. It's a war zone. Why did the government... Have you been able to establish, if you were not part of the decision by now, and I would have thought you'd be looking for it, why did the government decide to give visitor visas last year and not some sort of temporary humanitarian visa?
Well, this has been a total distraction that has been run by the opposition over the course of the last 2 weeks. That's actually what's going on in the Parliament right now, Andrew. The substantive point here is this. Our security agencies are the same that existed when the opposition were the government. The people running them are the same who were running them when the opposition were the government. And the advice is the same. And might I say, our confidence in those security agencies is as high today as it ever has been. We have confidence in them, and you know what? So do the opposition. And they run an assessment across everyone who enters this country, no matter what visa they're coming on, and no matter what the circumstances of that entry is. And that has applied in relation to this cohort that has come to Australia. But the reason that the opposition are focused on this is because they want to distract from the fact that they have nothing to say on what actually matters to Australians, and that is cost of living pressures.
You say you've got the same personnel. You don't have the same head of Home Affairs, that's for sure. Why visitor visas? Why did you give these? Why did your department, the minister, grant these visitor visas?
Whatever visa we are talking about, Andrew, literally whatever visa we're talking about, ASIO is the principal agency which does the national security checks, which does the security checks in respect of those coming to our country. And they did so in relation to this cohort as well. I mean, that's the fundamental issue that matters if we are talking about the safety of Australians. ASIO were present in the process as they are in respect of anyone who is
and I
coming
accept
to this country. And so that is well then it kind of begins and ends there, because once it is clear that we understand that ASIO were there, that they were running their eye over this, that they have done all the security checks, that they've done it in the way they would have done it, did do it under the former government when we saw significant cohorts of people rightly come in from very difficult parts of the world. Once we understand that, there is no substantive issue here. What there is an attempt to distract from the fact that the opposition have nothing to say on the issues that really affect Australians, and that is what we just talked about.
Mr. Marles, except they were never coming as visitors, were they? They weren't coming to see the Opera House. They were fleeing a war zone. So why wasn't there a humanitarian visa in place? Is it, as Ed Husick said to me last week, because you needed to get those people out in a hurry? Is that why there were visitor visas?
Again, I just come back to the fact that everyone has their own story in terms of the circumstances on which they are coming to Australia. But whatever that is, there is a security assessment which is done. And it was done in relation to the entirety of this cohort. And might I say also, it's a security assessment which is continuous, meaning everyone who is in the country right now under a visa, be it this cohort from the occupied Palestinian territories or indeed from any other part of the world, there is a continuous assessment of people who are in this country under visas, and that is done by ASIO. And so, that is what is applying here. You can get into the weeds of the specific visa classes, but what matters from a security point of view, was ASIO in play or not? Of course they were, they always are, and the opposition knows.
All right.
And once you understand
in that sense,
all that this is, which is so clear, is just a big, massive distraction from the fact that they have nothing to say about what they are going to do for Middle Australia, given the significant cost of living pressures that we are experiencing, given the global inflationary environment. And they know we are active on that. They know we've done something they never did do, which was 2 surpluses.
Are you satisfied then none of the people coming on those visitor visas will be a risk going forward?
I'm satisfied that all the security checks are in place in respect of this cohort, as have applied to any cohort who have come to this country. Yes, I am.
Will the government keep letting Palestinians in on visitor visas, or, given it's a war zone, set up a humanitarian visa?
The government will keep ensuring that ASIO is front and centre in the security assessments that occur in relation to any person, no matter where in the world they come from, who is coming to this country. That is the critical point here. But I'd make one other practical observation. The border in relation to the occupied Palestinian territories is closed, and it has been closed for months, as the opposition know. And the fact that this is a political distraction is best evidenced by that. Because if this was really an issue of concern to them, they would have been raising it months ago, but they didn't, because that's in fact when people were coming. The border has in practice been closed. The reason this is being raised now is because we went back to a parliamentary sitting week, because Peter Dutton gave a statement when Olympians were coming home and being welcomed in this country, and the Liberals then doubled down on that. But essentially, they've been desperate to distract from the fact that they've got nothing to say on the issues which actually matter to Australians. They can do that.
All right,
we're not going to be distracted. You know, our focus really is on the economy. It is on waging a war on inflation, and it is on cost of living. And to go back to your very first question, you know, what happens at the next election is what will happen, clearly. But what I know is that for the term that we've been elected to government, we are going to continually be focused on this issue. And I think what that does is put us in a very good position to tell a very good story about our efforts come the next election.
All right, well, let's talk about some of those other issues. It seems you're close to an aged care deal with the opposition. Can you confirm my report that the refundable accommodation deposit cap will be lifted and fees generally for aged care will be lifted? Will they be significant increases?
Look, I'm not going to go into the specifics of what's will be brought before the Parliament. We will introduce legislation into the Parliament when we've reached agreement with the opposition. And to be frank, there's been a very good conversation between ourselves and the opposition in respect of aged care reform. The challenge that the country faces is that we've obviously got an ageing population. We've also got, well, that's in part driven by the fact that we've got a demographic bubble, which is the baby boomers hitting old age, and people are living longer. And there are also, you know, differing preferences. But people want to live their days out at home, and there are now opportunities given modern medicine to be able to do that. So all of that is driving a need to make sure that our aged care system is more accessible, but it's also more sustainable. We're wrestling with that. To be fair, when the opposition were the government, they were also wrestling with the same issue, which is, I think, why there has been a very productive conversation between both sides of politics on this. And when we get to an agreement, and we feel hopeful about that, we'll be introducing legislation to the Parliament.
Briefly, though, people will have to stump up more for their aged care.
Again, I'm not going to go down that path. When legislation is introduced into the Parliament, you'll see what it is. But you know, we need to be making our aged care system more accessible and more sustainable, and that's what we're working with the opposition on doing.
All right, you announced a significant defence treaty with Indonesia and are travelling to Jakarta this week. Does this involve joint exercises in the South China Sea? What does it involve?
It will involve more joint exercises. I wouldn't specifically say where, but this is the most significant agreement, really, that arguably has ever been struck between Australia and Indonesia. It's certainly the most significant defence agreement that's ever been struck between our two countries. I mean, this is a statement that Australia and Indonesia are finding each other's security in each other. And you only get there by having a sense of deep strategic trust. And when you think about the journey that Australia and Indonesia have been on over many decades, that we find ourselves at this moment is deeply historic. And it's really positive for the security of Australia. It will see us be much more interoperable in terms of our defence forces. It will see us exercise a lot more together, but again, I wouldn't speculate where, but we certainly do want to be exercising more with Indonesia. part of why we're confident in being able to say that is because it importantly will allow us to operate from each other's countries. And so the ease by which we can work together and work from each other's countries is so much better, which will make it easier and encourage us to both countries to do more together. And that's what we really hope we will see happen. And I think there's enormous opportunities for us to obviously work more closely together in respect of defence, but also to exercise and train more together. So as you say, I'll be heading to Indonesia on Wednesday. We'll be signing this agreement on Thursday.
Indonesia originally opposed AUKUS. Has that position changed?
Look, we've been explaining to Indonesia why we are walking down the path of acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability. They know that this is really about Australia playing its part in contributing to the collective security of the region in which we all live. I think there is a greater degree of comfort about what we are seeking to do in relation to the acquisition of the nuclear-powered submarines. I think there's also an understanding that obviously Australia has its sovereign right to make sure that we are able to protect and defend ourselves and to provide for our own national security. So we're pretty comfortable with where Indonesia's at in relation to that. And again, I think the fact that, you know, in the context of doing what we're doing in acquiring that capability on the one hand, but also reaching this very historic agreement with Indonesia on the other, speaks to the deep level of strategic trust that there is between our two countries.
All right, just briefly, the Pacific Islands Forum this week. Can you confirm the report that there will be a Pacific policing agreement with headquarters in Brisbane?
Look, I can't. I'll leave those announcements or whatever comes from the forum to be made at the forum. But what I would say is that law and order is an issue that is significant in a number of Pacific Island countries, and we work very closely with a number of countries in relation to law and order. The Australian Federal Police and indeed the other police forces around Australia have very close relationships with the various police forces of the Pacific. So law and order and policing is definitely an issue which the Pacific engage us on. But I'll leave the announcements for the forum to be made at the forum. Obviously, the Pacific is front and centre in terms of not only our foreign policy but our national security. It's a profoundly important part of the world, as I've been advocating for a long time now. And I'm very excited about what's going to happen at the Pacific Island Forum this week as the Prime Minister heads over to Tonga.
And I'm going to ask you for a one-sentence answer here. Is Jim Chalmers going to China, and what's the purpose?
Look, I can't confirm that, but as I say, we've sought to normalise the relationship with China. We continue to do that. They are our largest trading partner, and there is much that we can cooperate on in relation to our economy. We will continue to disagree with China where we must.
Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.